Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Tonight, we delve into a saga that reads like a spy novel set in Eastern Europe, but with more geopolitical angst and fewer car chases. It's about Moldova, or as Russia sees it, the one that got away for now. Russia's ambitions stretch far beyond mere territorial annexation, aiming instead to reshape Moldova's political landscape through elections in hopes of a pro-Russian pivot. Amidst this geopolitical chess game, the people of Moldova and Transnistria find themselves caught between the desires of Moscow and the West, navigating a future shaped by far-off powers. We'll explore how Russia's strategy in Moldova mirrors its broader regional ambitions. So, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more before we delve deeper into the subject at hand.
Last month, the Congress of Deputies of the separatist region of Transnistria requested protection from Moscow in the face of economic pressure from Chisinau. This appeal to Russia was widely read as an attempt to pressure the Moldovan authorities over the economic difficulties faced by Transnistrian businesses, particularly regarding custom duties. According to experts from the Kazimierz Pułaski Foundation, this appeal from Transnistrian separatists seemed to be a response to French President Emmanuel Macron's suggestion of sending Western ground forces to Ukraine, perceived as a bluff given Russia's limited operational capabilities. As far as the economic aspect is concerned, Robert Ratajczak, an expert on Moldova, suggested that Transnistria might receive some form of economic aid from Russia, considering Moscow's historical support for the region. Ratajczak, however, emphasized that Russia lacks the physical capability to intervene in Moldova directly, with only a small contingent stationed in Transnistria mainly focused on guarding weapon depots. He also highlighted that the interests of the separatist leadership and economic entities in Transnistria might not see annexation by Russia in a good light, as it could threaten their power and profits. Transnistria, a separatist republic within the territory of Moldova, declared independence from the authorities in Chisinau in 1990, and following a brief war accompanied by Russian intervention, achieved almost full sovereignty. It has its own president, army, security forces, tax offices and currency. No state, including Russia, has recognized Transnistria's independence, although Russia supports it economically and politically, and around 1,500 of its troops are stationed there.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. The Kremlin's latest plot twist does not involve annexing Transnistria, a sliver of land that most world maps forget to mention. Instead, it's more about changing the power dynamics in Chisinau through the ballot box, because for Moscow, a pro-Russian Moldova in its entirety is a prize much sweeter than a piecemeal territorial grab. Their Congress recently gathered for its 7th séance since inception, crying foul of economic pressure from Moldova. They essentially penned a love letter to Russia while also appealing to the United Nations, the OSCE, and the European Union to save them from the big bad wolf, Moldova. The irony of seeking help from the West while snuggling in Moscow's bear hug is thicker than the plot of an Agatha Christie novel. Russia's response? A Kremlin spokesperson might as well have said, "Well, think about it, sweetie." While Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused Moldova of following Ukraine's lead in allegedly persecuting Russian speakers. In a twist of fate, a Transnistrian politician floated the idea of joining the Russian Federation. Despite the fear-mongering, the Congress didn't even whisper about officially becoming part of Russia, showing that Kremlin's support for Transnistria is as conditional as my commitment to a New Year's Eve resolution. And then there is Gagauzia, Moldova's autonomous region, which doesn't want to be left out, eyeing its own Congress to plead for Russian and Turkish support. In the grand scheme of things, Russia's playbook in Moldova is akin to its strategies in Ukraine, aiming to prevent any Western flirtation through a hybrid operation, as noted by the Institute for the Study of War. Moldova's upcoming elections are Putin's next battleground, not with tanks and soldiers, but with ballots and, of course, propaganda, trying to encircle Ukraine and keep Moldova from cuddling up with the European Union. Moldova's story is a reminder of the Kremlin's long shadow over Eastern Europe, where every election, every diplomatic move is a chess piece in a much larger game. And for the people living in these contested spaces, the stakes couldn't be higher as they navigate this reality, one where their futures are often decided far from home, in the halls of power in Moscow, Brussels and Washington. And now we're moving on to our guest today, Madalin Nekshutsu, journalist from the Balkan Insight. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello and thank you for the invitation.
So let's begin with the crazy little thing called Transnistria. This is actually a quasi-state. Can you tell us more about what it means in reality, what it means for people living there, and for its situation on the international arena, by way of introduction?
Yes, Transnistria is just a strip of land sandwiched between Ukraine and Moldova, as you know. It has like 4,000 square kilometers, and it's run by a pro-Russian regime since 1992. And now the situation with Transnistria is getting tougher and tougher, especially for the people living in Transnistria, because of the war in Ukraine, of course. This is the main reason. Because, as you know, at the beginning of the war, Ukraine decided to close the border segment with Transnistria. So a lot of the commercial interest in Transnistria was to the port of Odessa. So now that route is closed, and the only route Transnistria can export its goods, especially towards the European Union, is through Moldova. And since the beginning of this year, Moldova imposed a little tax on the commercial agents in Transnistria who, before that, didn't pay any taxes at all to Moldova for imports and exports. And that caused a row in Transnistria, saying that Moldova is imposing economic blockade, that it's imposing unjust taxes and so on. But actually, these taxes are not so high. The economic experts indicated that there are about 15 million US dollars per year. So the taxes in terms of big amount is not such a big amount.
So doesn't this show just how fragile this territory really is? I mean, that's the question often being asked to separatists across the world. They say, we want a state of our own, we want independence, we want sovereignty. And the question which often appears is, okay, but if you were to go for it, can you actually make it on your own? Could Transnistria ever make it if it all of a sudden, for some bizarre reason, gained independence, separated itself completely from Moldova? Everyone said, okay, you're independent now. So what's next? Could they actually survive?
No, actually, they cannot survive. They are linked to this free Russian gas pumping for more than 32 years in the region freely. We have to say that there is an accumulated historic debt of 10 billion US dollars so far from Transnistria, and Gazprom doesn't do anything to regain those money from the Transnistrian economy.
It's a political investment.
It works like this: Russia delivers free Russian gas to Transnistria, and then the whole economy of Transnistria works on free Russian gas. So once this stops, Transnistria cannot sustain itself anymore. So this is the main thing we should remember from this economic life in Transnistria. So about the political independence, how can you survive if you don't have an economic sustainability? So this is the main question this year, because Ukraine said that will not allow the Russian gas anymore to pass through Ukraine and be delivered to Moldova and then Transnistria. So we shall see if by the end of the year, Transnistria can survive without the free Russian gas. This is the main challenge right now for Transnistria.
So it's fascinating to see this interdependence, because normally if a country through which a Russian pipeline goes tried doing something like that, tried to say, we're not going to allow any gas to pass through, Russia could say, okay, so we could apply pressure on you. We could even wage war. But with Ukraine, I mean, they've already done that, right? Ukraine is at war with Russia. Russia has invaded. So there is really no leverage anymore. I mean, what else could they do? So there is potential for making Transnistria even less sustainable than it really is. Now, how about politics? If you look at any pictures from that particular part of the globe, it's a bit like a set piece from Goodbye Lenin. There is like Soviet symbols everywhere. I mean, this is probably the most Soviet looking of all places which are somehow dependent on Russia. You don't even see this to such a great extent in many places in Russia itself. But there is this Congress that is supposedly the source of power. How does it work? What does it? What competences does it have? And to what extent is it really dependent on the Russian Federation?
Yeah, actually, you mentioned it very well. There was a congress of the deputies of all levels in Transnistria on February 28, and they asked for Russia's help to put pressure on Moldova in order to seize the so-called economic blockade on Transnistria, and also to revive the conflict settlement format 5+2. In that format is actually dead since 2020 because they didn't met in that format since then. We have in that format two countries in war. We are talking about Ukraine and Russia here, and the tete-a-tete meetings between authorities in Tiraspol and the separatist regime in Transnistria didn't work out so far as Transnistria wanted. So mainly Transnistria is asking for benefits, social and economic benefits from Chisinau, and Chisinau is pushing for a political agreement on this conflict settlement. So the two parties are not on the same page. So that's why Transnistria is trying to introduce more pressure from Russia against Moldova to sit on the negotiation table and wants to dictate the terms of how this relation will go in the future. So as we know, Russia doesn't have so much leverage anymore on Moldova because, as you know, Moldova is not dependent anymore on the Russian gas. And the Russian business are even smaller in Moldova right now, so they don't have this leverage anymore to pressure Moldova. We have in Chisinau a pro-European government and a pro-European president, and they are doing a lot of reforms in order to maintain Moldova on this European path. So Transnistria is now in the worst position in this negotiation in the last 30 years. This is why Transnistria is calling so desperately for Russia's help, but even Russia doesn't have the leverage anymore to pressure Moldova in the sense of getting what it wants.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, Russia doesn't have the ability to conduct any sort of deep strike into that territory. They wanted to capture Odessa back in the day, but this has failed spectacularly. So now, Russia does have troops in Transnistria, but this isn't a great number, is it?
Yes, indeed. It has about 1,700 soldiers, but the core of this army, which is stationed in Moldova, it's for only about 100 Russian officers. The rest are locals, are Transnistrian who are hired in the Russian army.
So it's not enough to stage a coup, for example, or to exert military pressure, not at all.
All the military scenarios indicate that Transnistria does not have the sufficient firepower to attack Moldova or Ukraine. So
what about political change? Because this is where the plot thickens, right? Russia may want to topple the government by essentially taking advantage of the weaknesses of democratic institutions, by using propaganda, by using some sort of proxy forces like political parties. So how secure is Moldova against this sort of interference today? Because we obviously here in the West wouldn't like to see headlines, Maya Sandu resigns under pressure from pro-Russian parties or anything like this. Do you think that Moldova is secure against this sort of influence?
Moldova is trying to build more resilient institution, that I can say for sure. Of course, this struggle is not very easy, So Moldova has a lot to do in this sense. But anyway, it's trying to build up its institutions. As you mentioned, the propaganda is very powerful coming from Russia against Moldova. There are a lot of proxy actors, the pro-Russian, the fifth column, like the Moldovan media calls them. They are even in the parliament of Moldova. There are also these other forces, like the fugitive oligarchs, Ilan Shor, who is hiding now in Israel because he is also an Israeli citizen. He is now conducting the main operations against Moldova. He even had an interview a few days ago saying that he will be the next prime minister of Moldova, even if he was sentenced last year to 15 years behind bars in the grand theft of 1 billion US dollars from 3 Moldovan banks between 2012 and 2014. He was the mastermind of that operation. And
So
now
one quick question, because we only have 1 minute left. Moldova is fairly decisive in its actions, right? Because it has moved to ban certain parties, including the Shaw party. It's not something you see very often in EU countries, but Moldova knows how much is at stake. So do you think that this actually gives them an edge? If they see a pro-Russian movement, they just move swiftly to make sure it doesn't take root?
There are big debates in Moldova whether the authorities should intervene more clearly on this kind of actions. But they are doing this kind of exercise of not being violent to the protester, for example, to the pro-Russian protesters and so on, because this is also what Russia wants, for Moldova to intervene brutally to extinguish any kind of protest in order to victimize themselves. So it's a game right now, and Moldovan authorities should intervene, maybe more energetic to this kind of actions, but it does everything in its power to stop them. But I have to say also that Moldova benefits from the help of all the pro-European, all the European countries and its neighbors in this endeavor against any kind of meddling from Russia in internal affairs of Moldova. So this is a plus in my belief.
So it's still a very delicate balancing exercise there, but luckily Moldova can also count on the support of its allies. Madalena Nekshutsu was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for the invitation.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Russian legislators have introduced a draft bill aiming to declare the 1954 Soviet decree recognizing Crimea as part of the Ukrainian SSR as unlawful and of no legal force. The bill's proponents argue it will clean up Russia's legal heritage, but critics assert it's an attempt to rewrite history.
In 1991, Russia and the international community recognized Crimea as part of Ukraine, which made Moscow's 2014 annexation of the peninsula a clear violation of international law. The newly proposed draft bill cites the Soviet constitution to argue against the 1954 decree, aiming to counter Ukraine's narrative of Russia's unlawful annexation of Crimea. Critics argue that revoking the 1954 decree sets a dangerous precedent, undermining Russia's political stance since 1991. Legal expert Olya Butkevich dismisses the bill's claims, asserting that the 1954 decree complied with international norms and UN rules, and emphasizing that Russia's recognition of Crimea as Ukrainian territory continued until 2014. Whether the bill is signed into law or not, the UN and international community will continue to recognize Crimea as part of Ukraine.
A Ukrainian military source suspects that Russia's costly long-range missile strikes in Ukraine are guided using satellite imagery from US companies. The source supposedly noted a pattern where missile strikes were preceded by satellite tasking for targeted sites, suggesting potential coordination.
Ever since the onset of the war in Ukraine, Russia has been targeting the whole of the war-torn country. Some strikes, especially those aimed at actual Ukrainian military infrastructure rather than residential areas, are characterized by particular precision. Now, some voices suggest that Russia may be purchasing satellite imagery to third-party companies to use it in its armed aggression. Ordering satellite imagery is easy and affordable, with websites going so far as to offer estimates for new pictures. US imaging companies Maxar and Planet claim to comply with regulations, but suspicions persist regarding Russia's use of their satellites. While there is a pattern linking satellite tasking with Russian missile strikes, proving direct causation remains challenging.
Kosovo Prime Minister Albin Kurti has reaffirmed that he will not be suspending the central bank's decision to ban the circulation of the Serbian dinar in parts of Kosovo with Serb majorities. However, he expressed willingness to accept the formation of an association of Serb-majority municipalities once Belgrade agrees to sign a basic agreement on bilateral relations.
Serbia, which has never acknowledged its former province's 2008 declaration of independence, still pays many ethnic Serbs at institutions in Serb-dominated parts of Kosovo in dinars. Many also receive their pensions and get child allowances in the currency. Kosovo's central bank, however, has decided to ban the dinar, arguing that the move intends to combat financial crime and terrorism. Despite tensions with Serbia over the ban, Kosovo Prime Minister Albin Kurti emphasized that the euro remains the only means of payment in Kosovo, with dinars being converted into euros. He also added that any financial aid from Serbia in dinars will be exchanged into euros for the benefit of Serbs in Kosovo. The ban has caused concerns for some citizens and challenges in the US-Kosovo relationship, as noted by the US envoy to the Western Balkans.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says the delimitation and demarcation of the border with Azerbaijan, an issue that has been a key obstacle to a peace deal between the two countries after Baku retook control over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh last year, has begun. The decision, however, has sparked concern among citizens of small border villages over their future.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has announced that the delimitation and demarcation of the border with Azerbaijan has commenced, with special commissions working to determine the shape of border in the hopes of avoiding further conflict between the two countries. However, during a meeting with residents of the Tavush region, Pashinyan failed to offer clear answers to their concerns. Azerbaijan insists on the cessation of 4 villages close to Armenia's Tavush region and Azerbaijan's Kazakhs region. Pashinyan acknowledged that these villages are de jure within Azerbaijan's borders, but local residents fear being surrounded by Azerbaijani territory, complicating their lives.
End of the line for this episode of Eastern Express, but please don't go away as we got more latest news and features here on TVP World. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.